Halloween. Happy Pro Power Hour. There we go. I see us right now. Yeah, welcome to Pro Power Hour. My name's Chris Weldon. I'm one of the community managers of Housecall Pro. And this is a series we do every single week. Usually not dressed up, but you get a special version. We do this every Thursday at 3 Pacific, 6 Eastern, and we've been doing this since May. I can kind of think of this as a training webinar that you can attend every week, learn about a new feature, or sometimes we do a couple, kind of depends. We've covered a lot of ground so far. We still have some ways to go. We really started this off talking about service plans, talking about multi-day job appointments. We've done some actual like onboarding sessions as well for your technicians, for your office staff. And we have all of our past sessions recorded. You can go back and watch those. So if there's something that you missed or something you want to watch, we'll drop the help article where you can find all those on YouTube. And if you have something you want to learn about, if there's something that we haven't covered yet, there's a feature that you want us to do in the upcoming future, let us know. We're getting our content for the rest of the year just all prepared so that we're good to go. Pros, if you're watching on Facebook, I'll be monitoring the thread. I'll be sure to share any questions with Phil. But otherwise, Phil, I'll turn it over to you and we can get started.
Cool. Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm Phil, one of the onboarding specialists over here. Been around the product quite a bit for a long time. So if you haven't checked out one of our earlier sessions, please do. We've got tons of great information in there. Today, we're going to talk about something that might keep you up at night. So it's getting those invoices paid. So we're going to go ahead and remove the nightmare and show you some tips and tricks so that you can sleep better and be ready to hit the new year running and making sure you're getting all the cash that you are owed. So without further ado, I will go ahead and jump right into our slide deck before I do a little demo. So first thing for invoice settings, there is quite a lot, and there is little things that you can do to go ahead and keep you and your business having that money come in, having your office managers not be wasting time chasing customers down, because we want to take some of that burden off of them as well as yourself. What I always tell a lot of my clients is that phrase we use around here is giving you time back in your day. And nothing really takes up more of your time than worrying about where your money is. So everything I show you today, I'll show you some stuff here in the slide deck. And when we get to the demo, I'll even show you a couple of things that aren't included in the slide deck, but will still be some tips and tricks. And also, if we have some time, we might talk a little bit about some of the stuff that is upcoming. Not going to dive too much into that because even myself, I still really haven't gotten a chance to really play around with some of these things yet. But obviously, this is a big concern for a lot of businesses. So we are always making improvements to invoicing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the slide deck here a little bit. So the first thing for invoice settings is, if you've worked with me before and we've gone through onboarding together, we talk about this on the first call. I always lead you all as we are setting up our account to go to our invoice settings so that we can see that customer preview and see what the customer is going to be able to see. And I talk about within those settings, that's where you can set up your global settings. Again, we will see this later when we do our demo. Now, changing the settings will automatically set for every invoice moving forward as these settings have changed. Now, I always tell everybody when we do look at it is that when you do set up your invoice settings, that is really setting up your default in the account settings. But anytime we are going to send off an invoice to a customer, you always have the ability to make changes to that invoice before you send it off. So I know a lot of you deal with residential and commercial clients. Sometimes you have your setup for your residential clients, and maybe your invoice looks a little different for your commercial. So we'll take a look at how we can go ahead and make those changes together. Another big thing is, as I mentioned, we do like to give you time back in your day. So one of the features in Housecall Pro is automated reminders for invoices. Now, what it does is really to simplify, again, the payment process, keep you and your staff more focused on things that need to be done that are more urgent than really having to worry about having to chase down customers for invoicing. So All admins are able to adjust the invoice settings, either turn on or off invoice reminders. We'll take a look at that together. And I saw that we do have some questions about these, so we will address those a little bit later as well. Office staff with permission will be able to make changes to these as well. It's really the technicians who will not be able to. The way we set it up is the way we want it. We really just want our technicians focused on completing the job. And if you give them the ability to just simply send off that invoice or collect the payment. Unlike auto invoicing, invoice reminders feature that default applies globally to all of your customers who meet the criteria. And you can choose to exclude certain customers. That is one of our questions that we had before. So you do have the ability, and I will show it later, so that we can exclude certain customers from invoice reminders. So again, if you have a bigger client, maybe a big commercial client, we're not constantly reaching out to them for unpaid invoices. We did over the last, I feel, I want to say probably a year and a half, I think this due terms came out. Really, a lot of pros have been asking, when we send off an invoice, we want our customer to pay within a certain amount of time. And so we've gone ahead and set up some due terms so that when that invoice is sent out to the customer, they do have that amount of time to pay off that specific invoice. And if they don't, then it's going to be, something more that we have to reach out to that specific customer to try and get those paid. So just a couple of the text on here with some important notes is remember that updating your global invoice settings will only impact any future jobs that you will be sending off those invoices. It doesn't retroactively fix the ones that have already been sent. So if you recently created jobs that have a different due term, you can go to that job and update it independently. So you can go one by one if you want to make that global change and then retroactively fix the ones that you've already sent. Again, those have to be done on a case-by-case basis. Custom due terms are not supported at this point, but please chat and provide a pro vote if this is a critical feature for you. Because really all we have are the ones that we provided, which are pretty standard, typically like a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day. But at this time, we can't go ahead and make your own changes. That is something, if we hear enough about it, might be changed and improved in the future. Also for payment options. I know we've internally discussed we're going to do a session on payments a little bit down the road, but for invoices, typically I mostly see people do payments. If we're sending them an invoice, it's typically going to be paid online by their customer. So if they're paying online, they get the option to use their credit card. They can do an ACH payment, so a bank-to-bank wire transfer, and a newer feature that has come out in the last year is being able to store a credit card on file. In the past, we used to only be able to store credit card information for service plans because of the frequency of having to charge those credit cards. It just made it easier for you all. And we heard enough from you guys and feedback that you wanted to have this for all jobs. So we have set up an area so that you can store a customer's credit card to their customer profile. And then that way, when we invoice them, you do have the ability to charge that card. Now, that's kind of an easy way to explain that, but one thing to bring up is that when you do charge that card and hit that charge card button, it does send an email to the customer asking them to authorize the payment. So it's really not the idea of we can just charge them anytime without really letting them know. Customers are going to know, and they do have to approve that payment before it goes through. Now, when it comes to customizing your invoices, we're going to take a look at that in a minute, but you do have the ability to make some customizations. Question I commonly get is people want to change the format of the invoice. At this time, we do not have that. We really have one format, and you're going to see all the things that you can add or remove from the invoice itself. These things include like service location. We have a question here about parent-child relationships. So the billing address versus the service address. Things like people want to be able to see the business name, subtotals, customer information, technician information. All of this we'll take a look at, and I'll show how you can customize these for either the global setting for all of your invoices, or again, we can do it one by one as we send those out. So enough of me talking. Let's go ahead and take a look at, let's demo it and show you all how it is going to work in real life. So the first thing is just pulling up my account here. I want to show you all what is available within the account settings before we actually pull up an invoice. So within your account settings at the bottom, there is an option for invoices. The first thing, as I mentioned earlier, that I lead everybody to is that customer view. So here is the customer view. And as I mentioned, this is the global settings, the default. So I can see here and make any changes. The first thing we'll talk about is the default terms. So as we mentioned, a pay by date. So we do have the ability to say that the invoice is due upon receipt. Sometimes some people want that payment in advance, so we'll say that it's due upon the start of work or on payment is due upon the completion of work. So you do have all three of those options available to you. We also did talk a little bit about you can set a net amount of days for an invoice to be paid. And as you noticed, right here on my invoice, it went from upon receipt. And if I switch it over to net, it's going to let the customer know in this box what is the net amount of days it takes for them to pay this invoice. So also, as I mentioned, we do have a couple of different options here for you. We've got 30 days, 60 day, 90 day, and all these other different options at this time. But if you want us to have a little bit more customization, again, reach out with some pro votes to our blue chat bubble so the developers and product team can hear your thoughts and start to work on that. Underneath here, so we have job and invoice. So you do have the ability to say, okay, we're going to show them what the job number is. And in this example, it's going to be job number 12. Some people ask about having an invoice number as well. So my invoice number here is 1234. Now, this is, again, just kind of an example. When we pull up a real invoice, we'll see how those look. I did see a question that we will address later on why is my invoice number different from my job number? We're going to talk a little bit about that a little later when I start taking some questions. But really just kind of want to point out here is that you do have the ability to have either one, or you can always remove any of these options. The next thing on here is the view format. So if you are a business where a lot of your clientele really doesn't do emails, and you do more hard paper, sending out invoices via mail, there is an option for email optimized, which will format your invoice so it's better looking when you send it off as an invoice. And then there's also, if we switch it over to envelope optimized, you'll see that there at the bottom here, it says for use with a number 9 or number 10 window envelope. So that way, when you fold it up, it's going to have all of your business information going through that little clear part on the envelope. So some other customizations that we can do is for business and customer. For this, we can include the technician name of the person, who went out there and actually performed the work, or we can remove it. I know a lot of companies that I've talked to in the past tend to like to have that so that it kind of reminds the customer of who went out there so that when they are leaving a review, they can always call back on the person that helped them. There is also a place for customer display. I'm going to try and put it together so we can see here. So for customer display name, as you noticed, if I turn it on, it's going to say John Doe up there. But if I turn it off, that's going to remove it and just have the company name. Now, a while ago, we talked about putting customers into the system. And when you are putting a customer into the system, there's always going to be a field that says display name. And so what I commonly tell people is display name is what you want to be on the invoice. So one thing that always gets brought up to me is, well, I work with a couple and they both want to be on the invoice. Sometimes the husband's there, sometimes the wife's just there. But they're the same people and we want to have the same profile. Now in Housecall, we don't really have the ability to say like, okay, well, Phil Spangola's he has his profile in here and his wife Katie, I have to create a whole new profile for her. Technically, you don't. What I coach people to do is that within your display name, you can go ahead and say Phil and Katie Spangola. And then that way we're both on the invoice, but we're still kind of one profile, even though it's for me. Customer company name. So for people that are dealing with businesses, you can always have that customer company name. Again, this is pulling from when you are putting a customer into your system. So if you do put something in the company field as you are adding that customer, that will appear on the invoice if you want it to with this checkbox. As we kind of scroll down, the next option here is services. So for services, you do have the ability to have to show your line items along with your service names. You can have the descriptions added as well. You can also have the quantity. Now, typically with services, we don't really have a quantity. I feel like with services and when people are using quantity, it's more in relation to labor. So if you are putting labor as a line item, I always tell people to put that as a service line item. And if you want to show essentially how many hours that person did, that's where you would want to use quantity. Unit price. I also typically don't see many people do this, but it is there available to you. So it can tell the customer that, this particular this quantity for one of these particular items is going to be $3.90. And as we'll see, that the line items amount, that's going to be the total amount. So if the quantity is 2, the customer is going to see that the unit price per one is going to be $3.90, but the total is going to be $7.80. Again, we'll plug some numbers in and see this in real life on a actual invoice. Now, I also have a lot of companies that I've talked to in the past who said, I don't really want to show the customer description, the service name. I just want to show them a subtotal and that's it. If you want to simplify it like that, we have done that for you. So you can remove all of these options, including the line items. And you'll notice that there it says services subtotal is $3.90. So if you are a company that just simply wants to show a subtotal, that is the way you're going to do it. Same thing for materials. As everyone should be familiar with, we break our invoices and estimates up into services and materials. So just about everything you can do in terms of formatting for services, you can do the same for materials. So if we want to show what that material was or not, if we want to show the description of that material or not, the quantity of the materials we've used, the unit price, line items, the amount. So the total of, in this example here, we used 2 of this particular material at $5 a piece. So it was a total of $10. Same idea. If we don't want to show all of that information and just simply have a subtotal, we can do that as well. So that on the invoice, it just breaks down the subtotal of the materials as well as the services. I'm just going to put a couple of these in here just so that we can see it on the next end. So that's really it for customer view, being able to globally set up how you want your invoices to look. The next thing in here is email and SMS. So if you are familiar with the system, you know that we can always send off our invoices via email or via text. So this is really here. If you've done it before in the past, you'll notice that anytime you send it off, it's going to ask, a window will appear and allow you to put in the email address, make any changes to the message that is going to go on that email. Same thing with the text messaging. But if you don't want to be doing this every time, we did make this feature available so that you can come into your settings and basically set up the default for what that text message is going to say and the default for what that email is going to say. So you don't have to really rely on what we give you. For payment options, we already kind of discussed this. My account, I don't have a credit card machine, so I don't really have a processing or a processor over here. But if we go back to what we were talking about in this particular slide, this would be here if you do have your payment, if you have your payment set up to go through Housecall, so that way you can turn the switch on if you want to accept credit cards, ACH payments, or save credit cards on file. Now, some automations. This is where those invoice reminders are. And the first thing on here is the unpaid invoice reminders. You can always turn this on. You can always turn this off. You also do have the ability to go ahead and customize the frequency of how you want these automatic reminders to go out. So do you want them to go out every day, every 3 days, every 5 days, 2 weeks, 30 days, whatever? And you can also set up the maximum amount of reminders. So just to kind of clarify this, if we're going to say every 3 days with 10 reminders, that means every third day that this invoice is not paid, one of these 10 reminders is going to be sent, and it's going to do it 10 times. So if that person hasn't paid by the 10th reminder, we've kind of done our part on our side. It's probably now on you to get on the phone, call that customer, figure out where that money is, or if you want to pull up at their house, I don't recommend that, but that is available as well. For automations as well, as I mentioned earlier, and an answer to one of the questions that was given to us beforehand, you can always exclude customers from those automated reminders. So in this case, I have my brother and nephew over here. I'm not going to bug them with automated reminders because I can just shoot them a text and be like, "Where's my money?" So that does answer the question. You can always exclude people. The other thing on here, which we will talk a little bit about, is progress invoicing. This is, again, as you can see, a blue bubble right there saying it's a new feature. We have heard from many of you that sometimes you work on some projects that take multiple days, and maybe you have a grand scheme of, let's say, $10,000 that the customer has approved for on this particular project. Well, maybe your first phase of that project, you want to collect $400 of that because you've already completed the work. So we can go ahead and set up progress invoicing so that we can go ahead and say, here's your first invoice for the first $400. And then when you're ready to send them the next invoice for, let's say, the next $300, you can do that. I will show this when we jump over to a job, but just wanted to point out that this is where you can turn that on if you want to use this particular feature. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up a job here. All right, so the first thing that I want to point out is for invoices. You're going to see up here at the top, this is where you do need the progress invoicing turned on in order to see this, because this is essentially how we're going to do progress invoicing. So if we're going to go ahead and say, this is one I recently did, so there's $240 for this particular project. So if I want to go ahead and maybe invoice the first 100, I can go here to the invoice button, hit invoice. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that before we send off an invoice, we can always make changes to that invoice before we send it off. So in here, we have our details. This is where at the top, we can go ahead and change the invoice date if we want to. I've had some pros in the past talk to me about, well, we completed the work a month ago, but we want to send off the invoice maybe a month from now. You can go ahead and do that. You can always change the invoice date. Payment terms, as we discussed earlier, this is where you can go ahead and say, well, I want it due upon receipt, start of work, or completion of work. I want it due on a set time period, or it's due on a specific date. Specific date is only for single invoices because obviously we don't want to be setting that up as a global feature. That's really just going to kind of screw everything up in the system. So that's why it's not available for a default setting. It is a one-by-one setting. Invoice amount. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of progress invoicing. So for this project, it's $240 as the complete subtotal, but let's go ahead and say that we just want to bill for $100 now. There is also the feature here where we can go ahead and say a specific percentage. So for a lot of you who do deposits or want to collect money up front before starting the project, you can always put in a percentage instead of a dollar amount. Also on invoices, you do have the ability to add any attachments. So if you want to upload any of those photos that were taken on the job, any permits that were required, any other files that are related to this project that you want to share with your customer, this is where you can attach any of those files, photos, or other attachments. We also do have a place that if you are utilizing the checklist feature, you can add checklists to the invoice, so that way the customer can go down the checklist and, see all of the things that you completed. Also, if you are doing inspection sheets, which I've typically coached a lot of people to do their inspection sheets using our checklist feature, that way you can go ahead and upload that inspection sheet with your invoice so that the customer has more transparency of what happened on this particular project. You always do have the ability to add an additional message on your invoice. There is a global setting for this as well, but on each invoice, we can always customize it before we send it out. I usually tell people for invoice messaging, it's a great place to put if you are 24 hours, or if you take emergency calls after dark, things like that, because as the customer gets the invoice, they'll be able to see all of that information, because within our system, you don't really have a great place to show that you are 24 hours. So I always tell everybody that this is the best place. Let them know you're 24 hours, you take calls after hours. On here is the payment options, which I already showed you on the slide, where we can say, do you want to pay by credit card, ACH payment, or it is having here, if I did save a credit card, I would be able to go ahead and push charge the credit card button. And down below here is where all of those items that I showed as we went over the global settings, where you can go ahead and make any changes to a particular invoice before sending that out. All right, so we have the $100 here. I'll go ahead and send this off to my customer. And we'll go ahead and I'm just going to mark this as cash because, again, I don't have a credit card machine. So notice that that one invoice for progress invoicing, I sent it out to the customer. We collected our payment and we can see there that it's listed as paid. And now there is the due amount up here for the remaining balance. So you do have the ability, if you want to go ahead and send off the final invoice or another progress invoice, you can certainly do so. So before I open it up to questions, there is one other thing I wanted to show everybody. Actually, I guess there's two. So over here, you can see no payment method, add a card, request a card. So if I want to add a card, I can press the button there. If I'm on the phone with the customer, I can collect their credit card information. There is a little fine print here by saying that you acknowledge that you receive written and verbal consent from the cardholder to save and charge the card listed above. Again, I've seen is that whenever you charge a card, an email gets sent to the customer asking them to authorize the payment. If you want to simply request the card information, you can go ahead and put in an email address, or you can send them a text message prompting them to either send you their credit card information or get that approval from them. Now, the other thing I wanted to show, I see this mostly for commercial accounts, but we did talk about this when we went over the customer profile a couple of sessions ago. But for individual customers, you can scroll down and there is going to be an option for auto invoicing. Now, I always see that this is best used for people that have commercial accounts, or work with specific companies that don't want to pay invoice by invoice by invoice. They would rather just pay off a lump sum over a period of time. So auto invoicing is the best way to do this, in my opinion, because same idea as those reminders is that we can set up a frequency. The most common one that I have typically seen is that people will set it for monthly, repeat every month. And you have the ability to say like the first day of every month, or maybe the first Monday, Thursday, whatever it may be. But what I typically see is monthly, repeats every month, repeat on the first day. Now, what's that? Now, what that is going to do is on the first day of every month, it is going to send your customer a summary of all of their outstanding invoices. So when they are ready to make payments, again, going back to a little bit of what we talked about on the customer profile session, we can always come over to jobs. And so when that customer says, hey, I want to pay off my last few invoices, I got that summary. We can easily do that by checking off which invoices that they want to pay. And if we slide over, there's the pay button right there so that we can go ahead and take payment over multiple invoices, or If a customer says, hey, can I get a copy of my last 3 invoices? I can't seem to find them, and I'll just pay them online. Again, we just highlight the ones that we want to send off, and there's the send button right there to send off a batch invoice. It'll show the total amount of all 3 invoices. And as we look at it, we can see all 3 invoices that are going to be sent to the customer before actually sending them off. And that's really all the tips and tricks I have, and secrets, witchcraft that we have over here to help you with your invoicing. So I will go ahead and open the floor to any questions. First, I'll take a look at the chat over here. Any come through, Chris?
I don't see any on Facebook. I see some feedback. We'll definitely share that. Laura, who works on our invoices here at Housecall, she's very active in the group. And here over on Zoom, Michael, I see you have a hand raised. If you have a question, feel free, put it in the chat. And maybe we'll circle back to that after Phil goes over a few of these FAQs.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer some of these questions we got beforehand. Certainly, again, feel free to throw any questions in the chat, and I will address those once we're done here. So the first one from Steven, if I create the auto invoice on a Monday for Tuesday, and have that go every 4 weeks, will it invoice that following day or in 4 weeks on that Tuesday? So ideally, if you do make that switch on Monday, it should go out the following Tuesday. I personally haven't tested this, but from what I've heard, it does take effect because essentially we are making that switch on Monday, the day before that Tuesday. But Stephen, I would definitely suggest maybe giving that a test on your end, just to see how that looks. But again, I'm fairly confident that it does go out. You said it on Monday, it will go out on that Tuesday. All right, Jennifer, I want to be able to choose on every invoice that I send how often I want the unpaid reminder to be sent. Residential and commercial clients have different payment terms. So for that, Jennifer, at this time, as I showed, really for the auto reminders, it's kind of one size for everybody. That would be a great pro vote to submit, because I understand, as you mentioned, sometimes residential clients are on one time frame as opposed to commercial accounts. So I would definitely recommend putting that in as a pro vote, but at this time, it's kind of everybody is on the same schedule. All right, Chase, why do our job numbers and our invoice numbers not match? Now, as I was kind of going over, thinking about this all day, really, because this has kind of been a problem and a common thing that has come up with myself as well as my team. What I would recommend for this, first off, before I kind of give an explanation, is I don't know what your situation is. You may want to reach out and set up a support call, because if it is something that shouldn't be the way it is, then we should take a look at it. However, as I kind of showed you all, is that we do have the ability for progress invoicing. So if we're going to say it's job 13, and that job is going to have, 3 different progressive invoices, then, it really doesn't make sense for us to say, okay, well, here's job 13, here's invoice 13 for the first $100. So the next invoice is also going to be invoice 13 for the next $200. It doesn't make sense, and it's really just going to kind of ruin the books and the data within the system. So that is kind of the overhead reason of why that may not be the case for you. But again, if you are not doing progress invoicing, that may be a deeper issue that you may want to set up a support call for, so we can take a look at what's going on. Zella, what does the send a maximum of number reminders mean? I did just talk about this, but I will go ahead and repeat myself. Is really, you can set up that frequency of how many times you want to reach out, have Housecall reach out to your customer for you. Again, we don't kind of want to ease that burden for you a little bit. So once you hit that, the maximum is 10 reminders. Once you hit that 10 reminders, you probably should get on the phone and call your customer and figure out what's going on with their payment. Aaron, when setting up a parent sub customer, is there any way to also include the sub company name or display name on the invoice? Um, so when I was playing with this earlier, and just to kind of show it again, is that my customer here, Mezzi, bills to a parent. So when we go and look at an invoice, want to point out is here is the billing information. So that's where the parent information is showing up. The service address is that customer. So this is pulling the name. I don't believe it pulls the customer if that child has a business. So let's kind of take a look at this together. So if I pull up Z's profile and contact info. So here on the display name, this is again what's being on the invoices. So if this is a business, what I would recommend is putting the business name in here. So all right. So now if I'm going to go ahead and send off that invoice, we're going to see that it doesn't pull the name, it only pulls the display name. So if you want to have that sub or child business or sub business, what I recommend is putting it in the display name, not what the field is for their actual name, because that's not what's pulling for the invoices. And sub address, as long as that's in there, that's what's pulling for the service address. This is always going to be the billing address on this side. And last question from John, which we addressed, but I will read it off and answer it again, is can you turn off invoice reminders for just a few customers? The answer is yes. Again, just to show everybody, that is going to be within your account settings. And it's going to be under invoices and automations. So here, this is where you can go ahead and start excluding specific customers from those reminders. All right. So let me see if any more questions have come through. All right, I see something from Justin. We require 50% deposits on jobs before scheduling. Currently, we use the deposit feature, which creates a separate invoice. For example, would you suggest keeping that the method for collecting the deposit, or would progress invoicing be better considering the invoice numbers may not be the same as the job numbers for progressive invoicing? So Justin, this is kind of one of those things where I usually tell people it's really what works best for you. If what you are currently doing is working for you, don't let me change your mind on doing progress invoicing. If you do want to do progress invoicing, you could use it for deposits. But we do have kind of a deposits feature, which it looks like you're already pretty familiar with. And just for everybody else in the room, is if I'm going to go ahead and pull up a job with a deposit. Here. Okay, here we go. Service call, we'll say, $1,000. And we want to add the deposit. I gotcha. So yeah, it's pretty much the same idea. So here we have for our deposit, we're going to go ahead and say that we want to, as you said, 50%. So there it's showing that the amount that is due today is 450, and the subtotal here is the reason it's showing 900 not 1,000 is because I have this discount on. So let me just clear that up just a second. So we're all kind of talking about the same thing here. All right. So add our deposit, we're going to say 50%. And so that way, when we send it off to the customer, they understand that the total is $1,000 and the deposit is going to be $500. So when we do go ahead and send this off to the customer, and oops, sorry, I just realized I was not sharing my screen. So let me back up here. Let's cancel this. Okay, so we still have our $1,000 here. We're going to go ahead and set up our deposit for 50%. There it's showing $500. Here it's showing the entirety of the project is going to cost $1,000. So we'll hit next, send off the email with the invoice. Let me pull up. Okay. So here is the email. We're going to hit view invoice. And just as the customer sees, it's going to prompt them to pay the $500 deposit. So again, it's kind of a similar feature, kind of used the same like kind of the same way. Again, it's really what works best for you. Just with deposit, it does really kind of say that a deposit is due, that $500. If it was the progressive invoicing way, it's not going to show the job total because that specific invoice is a specific amount, if that makes sense. I'll try and repeat that one more time to hopefully clarify it if that didn't, is that the deposit is going to show the deposit amount and the job total. Progress invoicing is going to show just the total of the invoice that you are sending them. So in essence, it would not have that job total. It would just simply say that this invoice is for $500. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, certainly feel free to reach out to me and I will go over this again.
All right, all right. Y'all, I don't see any other questions on Facebook or on Zoom, but last chance, if you have any questions, I'm gonna go over a couple of things. Also want to mention too, if you're watching the recording, you can leave a question on the Facebook recording or on YouTube, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can, answer your question. But I know Phil had mentioned a couple, we want to just run by a couple of updates for you all. So I'm going to drop something in both of our chats, a few different links. First and foremost, if you are, and I know we're hearing a lot about this in the community, if you're one of those pros that's just experiencing fatigue with your invoice and job numbers not syncing and matching correctly, and you're not using progress invoicing, again, you can't be using progress invoicing. If you want to sync those numbers together, we have a sign-up form. So I'm dropping that in the chat. We'll connect with you and get your numbers in sync again so that your job and invoice numbers are the same. I'm also dropping a couple of links to a couple of new features that are coming. We have auto charge card on file. It's in beta right now. I'm dropping the link to the roadmap. You can go on there. I think that you can still sign up for that. Don't quote me on that. You might need to check. I'll check right now. And then we also have pay flows on the invoice list view, including bulk pay, and that's in development as well. Couple of things going on there. I just dropped that in the chat. Read about those on the roadmap and get a little bit more information.
Yeah, I would say definitely check out those materials. Just as our product here is continuously evolving and improving, our power hours will as well. So I'm sure that we will be revisiting invoices when these features start coming out, so we can give you all the chance to address any questions, and we can also demo for the people who haven't seen it before.
Yeah. Otherwise, y'all, I think that's gonna be it for today. Phil, thank you so much. I think next week we're talking about pipeworm. I think that's right.
All right, that's one of my favorites. So
Yeah.
excited for that. You all should hop on.
Yeah, definitely. If you've been, I know I've seen a few posts in the group. If you've been like, what are the pros and cons, or I'm hesitant, this is a perfect opportunity to see it in action. So Well, cool. Everybody have a happy Halloween. I'm sure if you're on the East Coast, you're already up to whatever you're going to be doing. But for us West Coasters, a couple hours from now, I hope it's a good night and we'll see you all around. Thanks again, Phil.
Bye.
Bye.